Good evening, everyone. My name is Maggie, and on behalf of Vroman's Bookstore, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for our virtual event this evening with Trevor Crafts in conversation with Amy Collins discussing the unseen photos of Street Gang, how we got to Sesame Street. We're so excited and grateful that our bookstore can continue to bring authors and their works to our community during this time. We'll be hosting more virtual events in the near future, and you can learn about them on our website, romansbookstore.com, as well as our social media at Vroman's Bookstore. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book. Just click on the green purchase button that reads The Unseen Photos of Street Gang directly below the viewer screen. The link will redirect you to our website where we continue the checkout process. We're selling digital audiobooks and ebooks through Libro FM and Kobo for those who are interested. So tonight, if you'd like to ask a question during the event, please use the Ask a Question box at the bottom of the screen and type it in. Please try not to use the sidebar chat to ask a question. So very briefly, tonight we have Trevor Crafts, who's an award-winning producer whose works include Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street, and Lantern City, based on his own Boom Studios comic book series. He's the CEO of Macrocosm Entertainment and lives in Weston, Connecticut. Amy Collins is an agent in the Talcott Notch Literary Services Agency with 30 years in publishing as a book buyer, sales director for a large nonfiction publisher, and the founder of the president of New Shelves Books, one of the largest book sales and marketing companies in the U.S. She's a USA Today and Wall Street Journal best-selling author. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Trevor and Amy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a wonderful event. I love doing these online events, and what an honor to be on the screen, supported by Vromans. Trevor, you used to live right near Vromans, correct?
I used to live in Studio City. So, but a quick ride along the 101, and there I was. And I used to love going to Vromans. My daughter, who is now 6, we always used to go to the children's book section, which is absolutely fantastic. It's one of the best, period, end of story. Try to steer her towards the books and away from the toys on the other side of the, back in the back, because there's always the good stuff and she wants it all anyway. But Vromans is such a fantastic store with such a amazingly rich history. And just having bookstores that are independent still is just fantastic and semi-mind-blowing. But the fact that Vromans is still with us and still here and still so vibrant in the community, I mean, it's an institution. It's amazing. I love that store. It's absolutely fantastic. I only wish that we were there in the store. And then we'd get a little coffee on the side place. And there's a wine bar that I haven't gotten to yet, apparently, that has just recently opened, I hope. And, so maybe we skip the coffee.
Next book.
Go with wine. The next book.
We'll do this in person.
It's a good plan.
Yeah. Now, you spent a lot of time in independent bookstores while planning and researching the movie that was actually the progenitor of the book. Guys, if you've got questions, make sure you start typing them into the Ask the Question box. I'll ask them all of Trevor as we go on tonight. But we're going to spend a few moments, just chat. Trevor and I will chat for a few minutes. There's a couple things that I'm curious about, and then we'll open it up to your questions. Because let's face it, my questions mean more to me.
It's true.
But Trevor, you spent a lot of time in independent bookstores when you were researching and started the process of the movie Street Gang, How We Got to Sesame Street.
I mean, I always sort of joke that I've been working on this project since 1865 or 1866, somewhere in that range. I've lost count because I came over on the tall ships, and it's as I say in the book, the path to independent documentary filmmaking can be a very long one, and it's not just sort of like, I have an idea and then tomorrow I'm going to make a movie and then here it is, everybody, and love it. It doesn't quite work that way. And I wish it did work that way. But we came up with the idea to do Street Gang because of another book, which found in a bookstore. Was not Vroman's, but it was an independent bookstore called Street Gang, The Complete History of Sesame Street. And this was a book written by Michael Davis in 2009. And it really was sort of, and is, the definitive history of Sesame Street. And I had been looking for a new project in the documentary space, and a friend of mine, Stephen Christie, and I write about him in the book. Sort of, we were chatting about it, and we're both huge fans of the Muppets and Jim Henson and the work that he did. And he said, well, what about Street Gang? Why can't you do that as a documentary? And I went, maybe I can, but probably not, because everything's been done about Sesame Street and everybody knows about it. And it's not really, it's been done. I'm sure the story has been well told. Sesame Street's like a gajillion years old. But I think what I was really so amazed about was just what I didn't know. I mean, I'm like a Sesame Street super fan. You know, it's like Grover and I share a birthday, October 14th. We're Libras, which is an excellent sign. And I really did think I knew so much, but I was just blown away by what I didn't know. I'd never heard of John Stone before. Obviously, I knew a lot about Jim Henson, but I had never heard of Joan Gans Cooney, or I had heard of her, but I didn't really know the level of the contributions. And as I sort of went deeper into the book, I realized that if this is a story that everybody thinks that they know, but they don't know, then this would probably be something that we all, as Americans, as a society, should remember. And then when we really got into it, it took on such another life, because it was really about a group of people doing something creative. You know, they were coming together to solve a problem that was bigger than themselves. And they did that through creativity, and they did that through, intentionality. You know, a lot of Sesame Street was born out of the civil rights movement. And this incredible turmoil of time that there was in the late 60s. And, it's not that different today. I mean, that was in a lot of our work in the film, because in truth, we worked on the film for about 6 years in total, from the time that I optioned the book from Michael to having it come out and premiere at Sundance. It was about a 6-year time span, give or take. And we really had a huge shift of our own politics in the United States and our own social fabric during that time. So we were almost using our unfortunately renewed American struggles as like a backdrop to edit the film. So it gave us more insight about that. And what those original creators, John Stone and Lloyd Morissette and Joan Gans Cooney and Jim Henson and all the rest of the gang, that they all faced when they put this amazing world-changing television show together.
The thing that blew my mind, I've seen the documentary. It's available now on anyone with HBO can watch it, correct?
HBO Max, iTunes, everywhere. Vroman's probably everywhere that, like 7-Eleven, I think, carries it. You buy a slushie and you get 7 Slurpee and you get, no, I don't think that's true.
But the DVD, the Blu-ray, streaming, it's available everywhere.
And HBO Max now, streaming, yeah.
What I was surprised, and I've seen the movie a couple times now, but what I was surprised by was the intentionality. This was not a show that developed into something, although it did. This was a show that was always designed to be powerful, to be for inner city kids, to be for marginalized children, African American, Puerto Rican, it was actually designed to help educate and formulate. It did not become that. It was that long before the first camera turned on.
Ever rolled, yeah. And Joan had done about a 2-year project to research and figure out if this could even be possible. So that was in 66, 67, when this dinner party happened, where Joan, who was a television producer, and she had a friend. She was at a friend's dinner party. This guy, Lloyd Morissette, who was a psychologist working for the Carnegie Institute. And, they were just sort of shooting the breeze. And Lloyd's daughter, Sarah, would get up, early in the morning and sit in front of the TV. Everybody else was still asleep, and she'd sneak downstairs and turn on the television and watch an Indian test pattern until the television actually came on and there were shows. And for those of you who are younger in the audience tonight, television was only on for a certain period of time, which sounds amazing and bizarre, but it's true. So, he was amazed by the power that this glowing box had over his daughter. And I can fully attest that the glowing box, which is now, a glowing box of a phone, is still got an enormous amount of power over children. But the landscape at that time was really sugar cereal shows, like a whole show about selling cereal, or Tootsie Rolls or whatever. And, the question was really simple. Can we use television to teach kids? And out of that simple question, Joan said, I have no idea, but I want to find out. And that was the jump off point. That was where it all began. And that started this 2-year journey to really find an experiment in educational television. And that's what it was. It sounds so weird now that it's like a show that teaches kids things. It's like, that's so old hat, but it wasn't. It's so hard to put yourself into the mindset of when it never existed, because it didn't. I mean, it was not something that happened before. And all the people came from civil rights movement. John Stone, who was the original director of the show, he's the one that came up with the idea of the street. He was very much an activist. He grew up in the time frame of, civil rights and the Vietnam War. And, that really built him as a person. John was the guy that brought John Stone. All of these different people, every person that was chosen to be a part of this team was chosen for a reason. They were using Madison Avenue techniques to sell the alphabet to kids. So who do you hire? You hire Jim Henson, the guy who's like perfect at subversive, puppet-based, late night comedy sketches, because that's what the guy did. He did LaChoy commercials, and he did Wilson Meats commercials, and Wilkins and Watkins, where they're like electrocuting each other when they're not drinking the right kind of coffee. I mean, this is, it's like hiring a hacker to protect your computer. I mean, that's essentially what they did. And they hired a woman named Evelyn Davis, who was the founder of 100 Black Women in New York. She was a community organizer, what we call community organizing. And they hired her to make sure that the show was resonating with the kids who were in that demographic, the kids who were in the inner cities, as they called them then, and that were disadvantaged because of systemic racism and poverty, and were not getting the same level of education. But she took buses out that had tape machines in the back. She went to community centers. She went everywhere to make sure that the community was really getting it. They were even flyers about how to tune your rabbit ears, because it was on UHF.
That's right. I remember that in the movie. Right? Yeah.
UHF was
you had so much history to pull from for this documentary. But the purpose of both the documentary, which actually showcased the beginning of Sesame Street. I mean, this is not a definitive history. It's an origin story.
It's an origin story, yeah.
And then the book.
It's like Iron Man for Sesame Street. Is essentially
okay. Or yes, the backstory,
totally
the origin
not
story.
The right. Anyway.
Oh, wow. But so here you are with literally hundreds of hours of interviews, hundreds of hours of footage, hundreds of hours of, and you can only use 2 hours of it for the movie, which, by the way, I've seen the movie now several times. It feels like 45 minutes. It just flies. But
better than it feels like it's 6 hours, I suppose.
Exactly. But so then you came up with the idea for a book, because all these stories that you feel so passionate about, not all of them could fit into the movie. But if I remember correctly, the book just focuses on the first year, correct?
The book is essentially, I'll go back for a second. I think it's a very interesting time to tell stories right now, because, if you look at a big company like Marvel or Disney or Lucas, they're really telling stories in a lot of different ways. And Star Wars is a really good example of this, if especially in the time where whether you like them or hate them, the additional, movies that came out, post Lucas's acquisition, they really tell stories in a lot of ways. They tell stories in video games. They tell stories in comic books. They tell stories in the films, and they all sort of interrelate with each other. And, I knew early on that we had, basically an hour and a half plus or minus to tell the stories that we could tell in this documentary, but that wasn't going to be enough. There wasn't ever going to be enough footage or time to put everything together and make sure that everything that we wanted to tell was told. The DVD has extras, so some of those scenes got back in the way of DVD extras. We crammed more Muppet outtakes into the DVD, but but from a storytelling standpoint, there's a lot of important stuff that we couldn't really talk about just for time purposes. And I thought, well, why can't we talk about them? Why can't we tell more of the story to sort of add and supplement parts of the documentary that we just couldn't fit in? And it was sort of during that was always sort of in the back of my mind, even through the entire production process, because there were so many things that had to be cut, just an endless amount of darlings that you lose in the process. And that's true of every documentary film for sure. But even narrative films, there's a lot of things that hit the cutting room floor. But then sort of we were just about to get ready to do our theatrical release of the film. We were getting ready for Sundance. I was cleaning up all these files, and I found a folder of images called Photos from Eli. And I knew what it was. These were photos that we had scanned in. Our amazing archival producer, Rich Remsburg, had gone to the Disney lot, and he had gotten photos with my producing partner, Ellen, to pick these photos up of early Sesame Street stuff from a guy named Eli Addy. And Eli is a very fantastic writer and an all-around wonderful guy, but he's written some shows. I don't know if you've heard of them. West Wing was one of them. I don't know if you've heard of that show. Emmy Award for that. Not that that's a big deal. House, Billions, these kinds of shows. Nobody's heard of them. They're weird. They're obscure. You don't even know them, but this is fine. But David's mother was a very accomplished painter. Her name was Dottie Addy, and his father was a quite remarkable photographer who was very active during that period of time. And David Addy was hired to do a shoot of Sesame Street, this weird little new television show. Oddly, the magazine that he was hired by was called America with a K. And it was sort of a cultural exchange magazine for the U.S. State Department. And ultimately it was basically primarily distributed in the USSR, in the Soviet Union, during the Cold War. And, you would think that this spread would be enormous. There'd be like 50 pages of Sesame Street. It's like 5 photos on this spread. It was very small. It's like a 1-page spread. But out of it came 500 of the most amazing images of Sesame Street. And behind the scenes, people working. And we used these photos in our film. But for whatever reason, I saw this treasure trove in sort of a new light. And those 2 ideas of let's highlight things that we couldn't in the film, sort of connected the dots with these amazing photos that I sort of rediscovered. And that sort of was the idea for the book, was what if we continue to show things that the world at large had not seen, and also be able to tell things and get deeper into the story of the origin of the show. And that's how we ended up with the unseen photos of Street Gang.
Now, you have a copy of it behind you. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you in a minute to show us a couple of the photos from inside the book, if you don't mind grabbing
I would
it.
be happy to.
Because some of the photos that I loved the most, I have to tell, the thing about the photos that really hit me was how much the Muppets have changed since that first year.
That's true.
And so seeing Jim Henson, powerful, seeing John Stone, the director, the creative genius behind it, the two of them, Jim, Frank Oz, seeing all that, amazing. But the Muppets, the puppets, and how much they've changed and what they originally looked like, and I couldn't put the book down for that reason. For me personally, I Sesame Street and I were born the same year, and so while you and Grover share a birthday, Sesame Street and I, we, class of 66, 67, way to go. But what blew my mind about the book was the interviews. Yeah. You've got Maria, you've got
Manzano.
And you've got Bob, and you've got, the actors were the ones that were interviewing. But what interviews showed up in this book that you really enjoyed doing, and tell us a little bit about the text.
So I think that, we obviously have Sonia Manzano, who also wrote the afterword for the book. She played Maria, the iconic Maria, for 40 years. And, Roscoe Orman, Holly Robinson Peete, who was the original Gordon's daughter, Matt Robinson, also the creator of Roosevelt Franklin. We have also people from the Henson company as well. Brian Henson's in the book. Karen Falk, who's the archivist, is also in the book as well. And I think that's the fun part. Like, we get to tell the story, which I love, of how Oscar was created. In the film, we get to talk about, that the character of Oscar was designed because, John felt it was really important to know that you could still be friends with somebody that you disagreed with, or somebody that was kind of nasty or kind of mean. And he's the embodiment of what parents always say: you cannot do that. You must not do that. And that's part of the show, showing all these different sides. But Oscar was originally supposed to be magenta. And when they designed the puppet, when Jim had designed the puppet, television tape at that time didn't show magenta well. Like, from a color standpoint, the technology wouldn't show magenta. So that's why they turned him orange. So in the first season, Oscar was orange. Oscar gets his name from a restaurant that was around the corner from the Children's Television Workshop, called Oscar's. I think Oscar's by the Sea. And John and Jim used to go there for lunch all the time. And Jim was very much a doodler. And this is a story that Karen Fox tells in the book, that, there's John and Jim, and they're having lunch. By the way, that's a lunch I would pay a lot of money to be at. Let's just put that one out there. And there's an incredibly nasty waiter that comes by and is very difficult to manage and very difficult to deal with. And they kind of say, that's an interesting character. Maybe we'll name him Oscar. And it's because of the restaurant, which I love that story. And I'd never heard that story before. No. I read Michael's book and I didn't even know that story. Like, that's the wonderful nature of being able to interview people and talking to someone like Karen, or talking to, Brian, to find out what his dad was really like, or Lisa, or, any of the other Hensons, and that's true also of Kate and Polly Stone. They are some of my favorite interviews that we did. Kate
John's
and Polly
daughters.
Are John's daughters. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And Polly herself was on the show as a 3-year-old, talking to Grover, and we have a great little bit of that in the film. But they really expound on what it was like to be on the set growing up. And that's one of my favorite chapters of the book, which is the last chapter, chapter 5, how we got to Sesame Street. Because as a kid who grew up watching Sesame Street, the only thing you wanted was to live on Sesame Street. Like, that's where you wanted to be. That was the place, and I wanted to hang out with Grover Not because we share a birthday. I didn't even know that at the time, but because it was so much fun and joy and exciting and interesting and new and unique. And hearing firsthand from Kate and Polly, and also from Nick Raposo, who was Joe Raposo's son. Joe Raposo was the composer of most of the music in the show. Sunny Days, Being Green, Sing a Song, 1,000 gajillion other songs that were in it. But they tell about what it was like to grow up literally on the street. It sounds worse than it is. They're not growing up on the street. They're growing up in on Sesame Street. And Nick Raposo tells a story about, being very friendly with a gentleman named Kermit Love. And there's pictures of Kermit Love helping Carol Spinney put on Big Bird, put on the costume. Mm-hmm. And Kermit Love had a big white bushy beard and big frizzy white hair, kind of Muppetish himself. And he was the Muppet Wrangler. He was the one that constructed and built a lot of the Muppets and was there on set every day with the crew, making sure that things looked perfect and were right. And, Nick tells the story about how Kermit would call him over and he would go over and he would take a look at which one should we use? What nose should we put on for the Anything Muppets? Because a lot of the Muppets that you see are called Anything Muppets, and they're, essentially blank forms that are colored, and they stick different noses on and eyes, and they're all Velcroed, and you can make all these different configurations. I'll tell you one other story in that chapter that is also, I think, fantastic. Polly, as a young child, picks up the phone rings, and she says, "Hello, Stone residence." And it's Grover. And Grover talks to her, and they have a beautiful conversation. And she says, "Bye, Grover." And he says, "Bye, Polly." And they hang up the phone. And a couple of seconds later, the phone rings again. And it's Frank Oz. And he wants to talk to her dad. So it's like he didn't break character. He was Grover for her. And then he's like, "Okay, I can put that down now. And then I can go back as Frank, and I can talk to your dad." I mean, it's just the care and the love that this gang of amazing people, had for each other is really remarkable. And to be able to tell that one story, the whole book is worth it, but there's so many stories.
So many of those stories in the book.
Yeah.
Speaking of amazing people, Vroman's has an amazing fan base. They've all signed up to come and chat with you today. And I've got a number of questions from them. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a favor. Grab the book behind you. I'd love for you to show the full cover, because we can only see half of it. Show everyone that's the book. And would you flip and show a page or two of the photos? I shall. Because I've got some questions here. And while you're looking, I'm taking these questions in order of as they're coming in. So guys, if don't worry, I'll get to your question. But the first question was Sesame Street an instant hit?
It kind of was an instant hit. Yes, actually. There was a period of time where a lot of people were concerned about how it would do. But pretty much from the first minute it aired, there wasn't any question that the show was a colossal hit. One of the reasons why I think, outside of having amazing content, one of the reasons that it was so well known when it was coming on the air was Sesame Street had a budget of about $8 million, Children's Television Workshop, when it started. And there was a lot of money. Today, that's like near $60 million approximately. And they kept a full $1 million for promotion and advertising. And that was for not only traditional advertising, but also for, the community groups and the work that Evelyn Davis was doing. But that's an enormous, at that time, nobody had ever done anything like that before. And Sesame Street also aired, I believe, on CBS the first time around. That's how important people thought that this show was going to be. And if it was a failure, it would have been a colossal failure. But it was pretty much an instantaneous hit from the minute it hit the airwaves. And it's, I think, hard to understate how many people thought it was fantastic. So here's one. This is a absolute great one of Carol Wilcox and the rest of the team, and they are, puppeteering and at the wall, as they called it. So, for so much of, and I'll see if I can find another picture. I know there's one of Jim and Frank. So much of the work that you do as a puppeteer, the entire set is built above you. So you can stand and put your arm over your head and operate your character. So everything is up over your head at all points in time. And here's a good one of Jim and Frank. This is one that we actually used in the film.
Yeah.
So, everything's high. Everything's high, always. So
now you said earlier in this event, you said that it took about 6 years for this movie to get made. How long did it take to put the book together? How long did this book process take?
I think it was about a year from the time that I came up with the idea. The idea solidified in October of last year. And then I think we had talked to Abrams and they came on board.
So you're published by
published by Abrams. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Published by Abrams.
Yeah.
And I think that was about the timeline. That was a very aggressive timeline to do that. And Abrams had the amazing insight to publish here in the United States and actually print the book in the United States, because obviously so much publishing happens overseas, Vietnam and in China. But boy, was that a good decision, because we would be not seeing the book today, I don't think, based on all the shipping delays and all the problems that we have with supply chain. I think it definitely would not have hit the shelves by Christmas, that's for sure. But I think luckily we're in a place where we were able to do that. And everybody on the Abrams team was fantastic in helping to get all of this together and done. Eric, who's our editor, he really was a champion of the book, but also I think the process of making a book is very much like the process of making a film. It's not a one-person show, even if you're just writing a novel and you're just sitting there and you're doing the whole thing. There's so many different people that go into the process of making something and helping to hone something and have something that an entire audience loves.
Well, and this is not an outsider's book. You work with the Sesame Street Workshop. You're working with, Eli wrote part of the book. It's his father's photographs.
It's his father's
You've
photos,
got Sonia Manzana. You've got the
Michael
actual,
David.
Yes, and you've got John Stone's kids. This is not an unofficial, you are deeply in. So when people, and I've got questions here, people want to know how many cookies Cookie Monster usually eats. I'm getting questions about what is Elmo's favorite color. Okay, maybe he can't answer those questions, but Trevor, you've been living and breathing Sesame Street for a long time.
I have, yes. I found out that's actually most of my life, but definitely hard, essentially over the last 6 years. By the way, Cookie Monster, the answer is always as many as he can get. So
Thank
that one
you.
is
Right.
is a definite. And Elmo, it's red. So I've answered both of those. Those are within my purview to ask and to answer. That's not a problem. But it is a collaboration. I think that's the part of this that I also really enjoyed was, we ended up with a very wonderful film gang, our street gang. We made our own little group in the film between our director Marilyn Agrillo, or our other producer Lisa Diamond, who helped in shaping a lot of the work that we did in New York, to our editor Ben Gold and Todd Griffin, who did the music. But I wasn't expecting quite the same group to come together for the book, but it did in its own unique way, which is amazing and wonderful. Between Eric Klopfer, who is our editor, and Eli himself, who helped select photos, and we worked together, obviously, to find the best ones that we could do. And he was on board pretty much right from the beginning. And I did want to exclusively use his father David's photos. Obviously, there's tens of thousands of photos of Sesame Street,
but they've all been seen. These have never been seen before.
These were sitting in a closet, for 50 some odd years. These were sitting as a box of negatives and a box of transparencies for 50 plus years. And he, was sort of looking in the closet and found these, and they said Sesame Street on them. And, through all of these unique sort of amazing things that happen when people get together and tell one person about another thing, and it's sort of, all the dots get connected, but ultimately that's the fun of it. And they came to us, and I wanted to use his dad's photos exclusively because it's almost like you're bringing that person back to life. David's been passed for many years now, but it is that you are bringing their creations back, and we certainly experienced that with the film, in the fact that, John Stone has passed, and Joe Raposo's passed, and, Jim Henson obviously passed as well. And, you're reminding people of somebody's fantastic work and amazing legacy. And that's very special. And it's also very proud of that we're able to show that. I'll show there's a picture here of David, and shows you also sort of the rarity of what he got to do. This is a fantastic photo of David, the photographer, just casually holding Bert and Ernie. Just chilling with Bert and Ernie. And I think that's the amazing thing about that shot is that, these characters were not iconic. These were pieces of felt. These were not things that existed yet in the Smithsonian, which they do now, right? I mean, it's like that shows the sort of ragtag nature. And I think that's what David's photos show. I think almost better than any other behind the scenes photo that I've seen. There's a rawness in the image, and there's a truth to it that I think his work does in a way that other photographers, and there's a lot of amazing photographers that have shot behind the scenes for Sesame, but there's something about the quality of light and the shaping of this that really shows David's creativity in how he saw the world. And Michael Davis has a very wonderful line in his foreword, that these photos are really just people at work, and he likens them to like a riveter, in sort of the pictures of the 1940s, people hanging on a girder. And yeah, they're just riveting, they're just putting rivets in, or they're hammering something, or they're working metal. But the metal that they're working, oh yeah, it's a Statue of Liberty that they've built, or it's the Brooklyn Bridge that they've built. And that's, I think, the fascinating part about these photos is that these are just people in a TV studio. They're not doing too much. They're not crazy. But they are crazy. They're all mad as hatters, but in the most wonderful way. But they're doing just their work that they love to do. But it's what they made that is so iconic. These are pictures of people making something that the world had never seen before. And we're seeing it step by step almost in these books. This is all shot in the first season. So this was all in 1970, the first shooting season. And ultimately, there's shots in here of, a bus driver's a person in your neighborhood. And there's Bob McGrath. That's the first time they ever did that. That's like the very first moment. And we've got that in these amazing images. There was no footage shot at that time. They didn't have the footage that we have, which came a couple, some years after. We have this amazing treasure trove of behind the scenes footage in the film, but they didn't shoot 8mm, 16mm, nothing was shot.
Well, and Sonia Manzana said it, HBO and Abrams, there was a release party earlier this week in New York. And one of the things that Sonia said at the party was, you guys have to remember, people were not sitting there with their cell phones recording. I mean, this footage was nowhere. And one of the things I want to remind those of you who are listening and watching right now, or if you're watching it on a replay, is this book and the documentary, but this book in particular, this is not just the history of Sesame Street. This is an important, these interviews, these pictures, the documentary, and the way it all comes together. It's an entire history of what was going on in society, social justice, racial relations, the civil rights movement, the women's movement. I mean, the fact that Joan was the one who was helming this at a time when women were kind of being shunted a bit to the background. This is an important piece of history that involves gender, that involves race, that involves social justice, involves the economics behind it. And you cover it beautifully. And so, yes, the documentary is important. You have to watch it. Go buy the DVD, the Blu-ray, do what you need to do. But the book, so what's next for you? I mean, so here you are. This is not your first book. You've done other books in the past.
Yes, true.
But now you've got this. I mean, this truly. It's not a weighty tome. It's light and fun, and there's quirkiness, and there's so much to it. So what's next for you with you and the book world? And is it all movies for you? Do you have any interest in doing more books?
I mean, it's interesting. Definitely. It's funny. I always say that working with Sesame Workshop over the last 6 years, I've gotten really a master class in how to work with children and media. I mean, certainly a master's class in children's television, but the workshop is such a fantastic organization in telling stories in so many different ways. So I've actually got a few children's books that are in the works right now, which are, hopefully going to be hitting shelves soon. But that's really the goal, is to try to tell more unique stories. And are there more movies? I'm sure there are more movies. That's sort of a bug that you can't shake. But I think that the idea of being able to tell documentary stories, but also support them with other kinds of media, in podcast or in audio or in book form, or I'm working on a cuneiform tablet. I think that's a little too old school for most people. I think that's not going to work out well, but I'm going to try it because I'm crazy that way. But it's right. That's right. Well, they're soft clay, so you just push them in with the shape, and then but I think ultimately that's what I think is so much fun, is that as a storyteller, we're not limited to just one type of media. We can really branch out and do a lot of different things. Obviously, in my career, I've done huge epic steampunk graphic novel series, and I've done graphic novels for kids. We've done documentaries, we've done narrative, I've done a lot of different types of film and television. It's really about building worlds and showcasing those amazing worlds that other people have built, for me, because I think that's one of our amazing capacities as storytellers and as writers, is to envelop the reader into a time and a place that is either totally unique or so immersive that you feel like you're there. And between the interviews that we were able, I was able to sort of bring back to light, these amazing photos of David Addy, and also the story of the documentary that I was able to add in to sort of the beginning. It's something that I really hope that everybody who reads the book and everybody who buys the book can really immerse themselves in what it was like to have this moment in American history, to create something. And I hope that that's also a bit of the takeaway, is that we all have the capacity to use creativity to bring joy to the world. and to however that works and whatever capacity we have for that. That for me is really, I think, one of the best things that we bring as humans to this place.
Well, this has been amazing. We're coming up on our time, and just like the rest of the world, it's actually a 50-minute hour. So we're coming to the end of our time. I want to remind everyone who's watching this either live or on a replay, there's a green button right below Trevor and I, right? You can see it right there. And I ask you to please click on that button, not only support Vromans and support
Absolutely.
Abrams and Eric by ordering a copy of the Unseen Photos of Street Gang. But click on that green button right below, because you'll be amazed at the photos. It's page after page after page. The book is a jewel. And it would be perfect for those of you who are watching this replay before the holidays, for anyone who, if you have any people of a certain age, if you've got any people who are particularly interested in either the civil rights or the history of media or any of the things going on, it's a great book for the holidays. And Trevor, this has been amazing.
It was a pleasure. It was so much fun, as always.
And both of us have to thank Vromans for hosting this.
It is always amazing to have a store like Vromans. I think that people in Pasadena, I hope they know how lucky they are. There is no store like Vromans anywhere else. We know there was no store like Vromans east of the Mississippi for a long time back in the day, but there still isn't, for me, any store like Vromans. So thank you so much, because it's always a pleasure.
Thank you both so much. I guess that's a wrap on our presentation. Thank you to our guests and to everyone who tuned in this evening. We greatly appreciate everyone's time and your support of independent bookstores. Support our bookstore and our authors and purchase a copy of tonight's featured book, which would make a great Christmas present or whatever holiday you would like to celebrate. Festivus for the rest of us. Just click on the green purchase button at the bottom of the screen that reads The Unseen Photos of Street Gang directly below the viewer screen. If you'd like updates on our upcoming events, make sure to follow us on Crowdcast and subscribe to our newsletter. Have a great evening and stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.